Anna, 100 days since the new... Is it only 100 days since the new government came in? It feels.
Can you believe it?
It feels to me like they're working us very hard. Tell us, just very simply to start us off, what are the kind of the big announcements that we've seen, and then we'll maybe unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I think, I can hardly believe it's 100 days because a lot has happened, as you said, and we've also had a lot of big industry events happening in the meantime. Yeah. I think it's probably fair to say, to start with allocation round 6, which was one of the greatly anticipated CFD auction rounds. It fell into the first few days of the new government, and it was really an opportunity for them to show their trust in the industry and accelerate deployment of all the key renewable technologies we need to see on the system. The auction went well, I think, considering that the previous one was allocation round 5, which didn't attract any offshore wind bidders. I think it's really made a difference in terms of market confidence and attractiveness of the UK market.
The UK's back in business, right? That's what
it's back in business, exactly. And we've seen actually some pretty exciting things, like the biggest floating offshore wind project, Greenvolt, that received the CFD, so that's exciting for the industry. We've seen a lot of onshore wind, and we've seen new offshore wind capacity. So that was a good start for the first government.
But we would have liked to have seen more in all of the pots from renewables.
Exactly.
So there's more to do. Right?
Exactly. I think inevitably we've had 1 year with much less capacity than we would have hoped. AR5, there's going to be all this backlog that we need to clear through future auctions. So allocation round 6, that was one of the first things that happened, but obviously government's been really busy at setting up effectively a new infrastructure around.
So there's a lot in this new infrastructure, isn't it? Maybe just to sort of quickly bullet points, what are the key pieces of infrastructure, and then we'll talk about that.
Well, so the first thing that people will have seen is the announcement of Great British Energy. Was part of the campaign pledges. It's been set up. The bill is now going through Parliament. You've given evidence to that committee.
For those
today.
who watch this, I don't normally wear a suit. It's because I've been given evidence in the GB Energy Bill Committee today. So that's one of the pieces of infrastructure. What else?
GB Energy is also going to partner with the Crown Estate, which is what we found out.
Come back to that.
Really focused on acceleration delivery. The other thing that's happened, mission control has been set up. Again, that's really looking at how we reach clean power by 2030. It's headed up by Chris Stark. So again, he's got a big job to do in terms of looking at blockers to delivery across the piece, across different departments, and ensuring that we overcome them and deliver as quickly as possible. The other thing that's happened is the establishment of the National Energy System Operator, so NESO, went live as of 1st of October. That is effectively taking the system operator away from National Grid, private, into public hands, now NESO. So again, they're going to have a big role to play in terms of accelerating this Clean Power 2030. They've actually been commissioned to look at that and how it could be achieved. They're also looking at what the network build is going to be required and effectively how the whole system needs to be planned. So it's a move to a more centralized approach to delivery.
I want to pick on mission control, because one of the things that members have been saying to me, and probably to you as well, is how does all this stuff work together? What is mission control going to do? How does it interact with NESO? What's your understanding of that?
Yeah, so I think some of those pieces are still need to be clearly defined, but I think we have some clarity on what mission control is already doing. We know that they've already commissioned NESO to look at Clean Power 2030. How do we achieve this? What kind of build out do we need to see of renewables, of the network, and how quickly does it need to materialize?
So NESO are going to give, from what I hear, they're going to give mission control a plan for 2030 in October, and that is going to have some scenarios.
Exactly.
And mission control have to work out what the right way forward is. Yeah.
Exactly, and we've been engaging as industry to kind of tell NESO, what is credible in terms of those scenarios, how much onshore capacity, how much offshore capacity you could expect, what's already in the pipeline, and how it can be accelerated. So the mission control's job is really going to be about looking at those scenarios and thinking about where the blockers are. So inevitably, one of the things is going to be around how do we unblock connections, how do we deliver those more quickly, and then mission control can have a more informed view because it's really looking at the whole pipeline and what we need to build to get to Clean Power 2030.
And to sort of dine out on the analogy a little bit, you can kind of like, if you're a project which is part of that delivery plan for 2030, and if you've got a problem, you call mission control and say, Houston, we have a problem, and then basically they have to work together with all the different government departments to try and unblock whatever that issue is, right?
Exactly. And the key thing is they're not going to replicate the work of any single department. So they're not going to be doing the connections delivery board's job, for example. Yeah. But their job is going to be going around departments, ensuring that they work together well and they can work at unblocking some of those key barriers together.
Which is good, because one of the things that we found over many years is that so many of the issues are interdepartmental. It's not one part of government, it's another. And then, this is about bringing it together and with clarity on the mission.
Yes, exactly. The other thing that's happened in the first 100 days is onshore wind is back in England, which is really exciting.
We've celebrated already, but we'll keep celebrating it because we fought for 9 years to get that lifted. So forgive us for the moment of dining out on that as well. So
Exactly. And I think what's really important is also seeing the onshore wind task force being established with sponsorship from government and DESNZ. So again, we're really excited to see that working on figuring out what are the blockers to deployment, how do we get over them, and obviously then we'll need to see what comes out of the task force, which we can touch on in a second.
Yeah, well, I've been, I've been on the task force. I was lucky enough to be invited. Very, very strong group of industry representatives covering a real, it's a very diverse sector, onshore wind, not only in terms of the localities that it covers, but also, the smaller community-led voice within the industry, as well as the sort of the larger utilities, multiplicity of issues to deal with, and of course, big supply chain. We've got a good story to tell on supply chain in onshore wind. Yeah. So really working out how do we get this sector back up to full capacity, because we know it's been progressing well in Scotland. There's some really good best practice there. How do we feed that out and sort of make sure that in Wales and England we get that growing as well?
Exactly. And I think from our perspective as an industry, this task force is a really great first step, but we'd like to see the momentum continue. So to that end, we'd really hope to see a target being set for onshore wind formally. So we've been asking for 30 gigawatts by 2030, which is achievable according to the pipeline and the data we have on Energy Pulse. And I think beyond that, thinking about how we continue this partnership work with government to continue deploying each year and ensuring that we attract that investment in supply chain and skills and everything else we need.
And one of the things I really want to see is that once we move beyond to sort of task forces and reports, which it's right that they should run for a limited period, but that we have that continued sort of engagement and nexus with government to drive onshore wind forward in the way that we have with offshore wind over the years. So I think there's really positive stuff there. Talk about maybe a little bit about floating wind. You mentioned Green Volt, great result. There was some projects that we'd also like to have seen progress through. What do we think needs to happen next on them?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about those test and demonstration projects, which we definitely need to see. They will enable future cost reduction of floating wind. I think it's great to see Green Volt. It's a big project. I think it's, again, a good story that we can tell in terms of innovation and the UK being at the front of the pack. But realistically, we need more than one project to enable those cost reductions. So we're also really encouraging government to ensure that those test and demonstration projects that are effectively ready to go, they just need a route to market, that they are able to get that route to market and are able to be built.
And also important in building the supply chain experience of this emergent sector and helping catalyse some of the big investments that are needed around, they weren't on their own, but help catalyse big investments in infrastructure that are needed for this sector, which is also, to be fair, moving beyond the clean energy mission, really important for the growth mission, because actually in Scotland and Wales there are real drivers why we should make sure that there's these new sectors emerge and grow.
Exactly, and let's remember we have the Celtic Sea Listing Round 5 coming up. That's going to be focused just on floating offshore wind, so we really need to get that experience of deployment in different seabed conditions, different geographies, to really see what impacts the price and how we can become more cost competitive in the future.
Okay.
So I think there's obviously a lot that's happened in the first 100 days. From your perspective, what do we need to see beyond the first 100 days? What else is left?
Well, let me start with the one which I just think is super important. We started this conversation talking about CFDs. I mean, it's one of those things we come back to and talk about very frequently, but the reality is, if you look back since we had the 50 gigawatt target, which is in 2022, we have procured about 3 gigawatts, 3 and a bit gigawatts of new offshore wind, which is absolutely not in line with that target. So it's very clear to me that auctions and the manner in which we procure renewable energy in general needs to be looked at. They have to make sure that AR7 stays on track in terms of timeline. And then we also imminently need to see the new sustainable industry rewards, or whatever that is rebranded as.
The non-price factors.
The non-price factors in auctions, which is an important change to the CFD. So the details of that need to come. We need to see the dates and the timelines for AR7. But crucially, we want to see within that some important reforms that help raise the level of procurement that we see through the auctions and get, instead of being 3 gigawatts over 2 years, we're getting 6 gigawatts every year or more, and that pipeline is continuous and sustainable. And that will lead us into the second area, which we know is going to come with the budget at the end of the month, is going to be the firing pistol started for the government's industrial strategy. And that was mentioned by the Secretary of State, Johnny Reynolds, at the party conference. So we're expecting to see the beginning of an industrial strategy. And so much of our sector is highly linked to industrial policy, if we want to see the supply chain jobs. So we want to work a lot with government to make sure that the supply chain is going to grow in the UK, both in terms of domestic growth and inward investment. And that's going to be crucial for the job creation in the long term. We know that story, but now's the chance. And the final thing I would say, which we haven't heard a huge amount of from government, is we need to start seeing the grid programme unfold. And we know there are big decisions around the connection reform process. We've seen some modest announcements on transmission network charging, and we need to see some decisions on REMA within pretty short order, because all of these things are going to lead to the investor confidence equation, which is going to be crucial if you want to crowd in all this money and all this investment and all these jobs over the next 5 years, and indeed into the future beyond that as well. So those are the big things for me. But there's probably more I've missed, but it's a huge amount going on. Just
one thing that I'd add in the next 100 days, even longer term, is seeing some progress on routes to market for long duration energy storage. Again, that's a consultation on government's table. We definitely need to see some progress on that to make sure that we can build a future system that's cost effective. And in addition to that, I'd also mention collaboration with North Sea countries and the EU more broadly. We've got some inefficiencies in the way that we trade electricity, and we're not maybe thinking as strategically with our partners about the supply chain, and that's really an opportunity for this government.
And after those 100 days, do we get to have a week off?
Well, I hope so, if all of this gets ticked off.
Christmas then,
right?
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Dan.